say that I'm very glad to take part in this seminar, and I would like to thank the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity. So let's begin. What I'm going to speak about is a small part of the research that we have been performing since summer 2014, when we did a field research in 5 Ukrainian cities concerning protest participation in Euromaidan. We made interviews in Kyiv with the participants of Maidan, in Crimea, in Kerch and Sevastopol with their opponents from the anti-Maidan, and in Kharkiv and Odessa we made interviews with the representatives of both of the parties. Overall it was for about 140 interviews, and the key conditions was that our informants had no previous experience of political and civic engagement. Of course, many of them were participants of Orange Revolution of 2004. Actually, my presentation is not much about the Crimea, but I'll try to adjust my words to the topic and try to bring some evidence from Crimea also. What concerns me more in the framework of this research is the strange kind of absence, or better say disappearance, of social and economic demands from the agenda of Euromaidan. Basically, what we see are the demands for European association that were followed by anti-Russian and anti-Putin personally slogans, and then after the burst of violence, we witnessed the slogans demanding the resignation of Yanukovych's government. Why do economic demands, to my mind, matter? Well, political studies of political protest generally show that bringing up a strong, specific agenda containing demands for social justice and economic demands makes the movement more substantial, provides the mass character of the movement, and it gives more long-term cohesion to the participants of the movement. This is basically the case of many protest movements, say protest in Spain, in Chile, in Latin America in general, in Israel, and etc. But actually, in the case of Ukraine, what we're dealing with here is the case of what is called negative coalition, when people with different status, people from different social groups, with different social capital, socioeconomic status, with different attitudes towards social justice issues, and even with different understanding of basic democratic principles, they spontaneously cooperate in a short-term urban uprising with one goal: to overthrow the dictator, the incumbent regime. Actually, when we look at the previous cases of that kind of negative coalition, which are Tunisia or Egypt, we can see that anyway the issues of social justice and economic demands were anyway put in the head of the protest, which is basically not the case of post-Soviet countries, be it Euromaidan or for fair elections movement in Russia. Overall, also, the overall tendency of contentious politics is the while the overall amount of protests is diminishing, the share of socio-economic protests, the protests against neoliberal economy and anti-austerity protests is constantly rising. And particularly, this was also the case of Ukraine, because in 2012 and 2013, according to research of Volodymyr Ishchenko, the amount of socio-economic protests in Ukraine was constantly rising. I think from this point I will just illustrate my argument with some quotations from our interviews to save time. Actually, notwithstanding the fact that economic demands were poorly presented in the Euromaidan agenda, the economic grievances and judgments about social justice contained the core of our interviews and the core of complaints towards Yanukovych's regime. People spoke about a lot about it, and they spoke passionately, and moreover, the decision, the solution of socio-economic problems were often seen as a #1 priority after the inevitable political changes will happen. And what is striking in our interviews that what is striking in our yes, here you can see the quotation from a guy from Crimean anti-Maidan who participated in the protest against local mayor, corrupt local mayor. What is striking in all these interviews that the possible solution for all the socio-economic problems in Ukraine is seen as a simple intervention of some outer forces, be it European Union or the affiliation with Russia in case of anti-Maidan. Here, and I'm not saying that this is some reliance on some kind of financial aid from European Union or Russia. Rather, it is, I would say, some need for supervision from the democratic institutions of Euromaidan or from the governmental officials from Kremlin. People rely on some strict rules that new Ukrainian elites will have to follow after European association, or respectively after the affiliation with Russia. Here you can see some. The second quotation is, I think, this is more spectacular when the person from Odessa, Euromaidan from Odessa, is proposing to hire some government officials from Switzerland to promptly achieve better standards of living for Ukrainian people and set some democratic institutions. To my mind, two prerequisites are crucial for understanding of why people speak in such manner about the future of Ukraine and about the nature of the social problems and how they can be solved. First one is general distrust towards national elites, which can be explained not only by the tradition of violations and corruptions and bribe taking in the head office, but and not only by the vivid inability of political forces to cooperate with each other in order to achieve public ends, but also it can be explained by the tradition of substitution of specific economic agenda by some kind of nationalist and regionalist populism, which is traditional for Ukrainian elites. Okay, in this sense, people could just stop waiting from their government any kind of solution of their economic problems. In the way that people also are in some way adopting the language of political leaders, be it oppositional leaders or pro-governmental leaders, they also begin to substitute their economic demands with these regionalist and national issues. The second, I think, no, it's too early. The second prerequisite is connected to the first one, and it is the very vague and ambivalent foreign policy of the Ukrainian state, which comes from times of Kuchma, when government officials use the argument of foreign orientation towards Russia or towards European Union as the ultimate, ultimate promise, ultimate political program for improving life of Ukrainian citizens. And of course, this vague politics is very useful for them because it helps them to balance between different expectations of different groups of population, and to gain some, from time to time, to gain some momentary electoral and political profit from this. But this is how this could explain why people in their expectations rely more on the external factors rather than on themselves or national elites. So our previous conclusion, which I agree with, was that social and economic agenda is present in Euromaidan, but in a peculiar way it is somehow embedded into the expectation of European integration. But what disturbs here is that it is existing in some peculiar paternalism when people do not rely on themselves, don't rely on the government, but they still rely on some external factors and that could improve their lives. Of course, I don't claim to provide let's say, ultimate explanation of why economic demands and issues of social justice were not brought up in Maidan. There are several other explanations that can be proposed, but still this is the argument concerning the peculiar situation in Ukraine. In other post-Soviet countries, there can also